Okay, I'll just try to
Thanks,
keep it
Lenny.
really brief. We just purchased a house in our neighborhood outside of Virginia City for a short-term rental. And as far as deal vetting, I think being able to analyze deals quickly is a competitive advantage. So having that spreadsheet, having the ability to run the numbers really quickly and understand, if the deal makes sense, can of course be one of the most critical things we as real estate investors do. And perhaps everybody has their own approach for that. I have I have experience in this because, I'm an accountant, so I do spreadsheets all day long, every day. And we saw the house on October 3rd. We put in an offer on October 4th because I was able to quickly analyze the numbers. I could see that it makes sense. It was a great opportunity for us. And we closed the house on November 7th. And now you can see my gloves, I'm fixing it up. That's my input.
So we have a question from Liz. What are some of the columns in your spreadsheet, Connie? Can you speak a little bit more?
Well, obviously you want to think not only about your initial startup costs, right? So of course it's the cost to purchase, any loan costs, closing costs. So you want to kind of lump that into two different categories. I would call it initial startup costs and then ongoing expenses, right? And of course, then the bottom line is, what is your return on cash, your cash on cash return, your ROI? And then of course, there's the intangible factors. Like Julie mentioned, we want to be doing something we enjoy doing. So if this is excruciating for you and you hate it, then it's, as Scott calls it, it's a zapper, right? So you want to be involved in something that it is interesting to you. Maybe you're learning something, but that is not excruciatingly difficult. Now, I've never done short-term rentals before, but I love people, right? I love real estate. I love people. I love fixing things up. So these are all factors that led me to believe that I have the interests and the transferable skill sets to branch out into an area of business that I've never actually been in before. But again, it's those transferable skill sets, the willingness to learn and grow and try. Getting a mentor really helps. So that's kind of a long-winded answer of some of the factors that I consider.
I think what Connie's doing is ideal. I mean, you got to put numbers into a spreadsheet. I would just be careful with the vetting process, guys, that my mailbox is full of wholesalers trying to sell me, houses, and you run their numbers and they're just knock out of the park deals. They're total bullshit. I'm sorry, but 95% of the emails that I get, it's just, you got to run the numbers yourself. If you're running the numbers, I don't care how good your spreadsheet is, if it's based off of pie in the sky ideals from a wholesaler, you're going to lose, or you're going to break even, or if you get lucky and the market goes up, maybe it will save you. You got to figure out how to vet your own numbers and add in a good cushion. And look, I have different ways of vetting depending on if it's rental property, if it's fix and flip, if it's notes. Just some really quick ones. If it's rental property, if you haven't heard of it, veterans, I'm sure you guys have, it's called the 1% rule. Look, this isn't the end all be all, but it's a real quick calculation. If your all in costs are a certain number and you can get 1% of that in rent, then, or anywhere around that, you're at a really good starting point. And it's like, if it's $100,000 purchase and it's $1,000 in rent, or 150 grand in purchase and 1,500 in rent, that's pretty much a knockout of the park kind of deal. Now, that's also going to depend on quality. We're talking a B area, a C area, a D area. And unfortunately, sometimes you're looking at, D areas, when you can get that more often than not, those kind of numbers. So keep that in mind too. One number that I don't see enough of when you get numbers from wholesalers or when people do deal analysis is really pay attention to the age of the house. If you've got an older house, your maintenance costs are going to be significant. And when I say significant, I mean, like year over year, if you've got a house that's like 100 years old, you're looking at 30% of your rent minimum is going to go to cost. Even if you do a decent rehab, it's just over time, houses really start, deteriorating. So that's just kind of my experience. With fix and flips, guys, if you don't have experience with it, be very careful. There's so many friggin' shows on TV that make it look like it's super simple. And I'm not saying it's the most complex thing in the world. It's not. I see plenty of people with less than a high school education do really well in this market. But if you're looking at going in that market, the number one recommendation I give to people that are thinking about getting into it is buy a house and live in it and fix it up slowly using your own hands and developing a team. And, if you're living in it, you can do this, if you live in it for 2,005 years, you can sell that house and any gain you get on it. If you're single, it's $250,000 tax-free. If you're married, it's 500 grand tax-free. It's one of the best ways to make money part-time in real estate tax-free. Back of the napkin numbers way of doing it. Guys, I mean, I like to see at least a 20% spread on a fix and flip. It's gotten a bit harder with rentals because, if you're financing it at all, it's gone down a little bit, from its high, but it's still going to be a decent chunk of your of what you're going to have. So I personally am not a believer in purely speculative, the house will go up and cash flow negative for now. You see a lot of that in California, and I think it's just friggin' crazy. Even a break even is not a break even when you consider maintenance costs and anything unforeseen coming up and breaking the bank. So always make sure there's a cushion in there for your rental properties.
Yeah, just to add to what you're doing, because you are one of, I think, a role model here for this community in terms of what you've done in real estate investing.
You too, Alex.
Not only that you do that in your area, but you do that remotely in multiple locations. And that in itself as a business, right, it's a challenge. So beyond the basics of how you fit a deal and the rest of it and from your experience, but you also found that you really don't need to do this yourself, that the partnering really is key. And can you expand on that, Chris? So in that way, kind of make others as well think about, you don't necessarily have to do everything 100%, especially if you're not able to manage the investment. Can you expand on that idea?
Yeah, sure. I gotta be careful because what works for me doesn't necessarily always work for other people. But so I prefer to give advice based on what people could take and actually use. Well, first of all, and again, I mean, I do things predominantly remotely, and it's because I love living in California, but I haven't found a way since 2010 to really make the numbers, or 2012 really make the numbers work here in the way that I like to. But I will say that a lot of what I do, I can because I've had that experience doing it locally first. Is when a fix and flips is happening, if it's happening in Florida and I can't go see it, at least I've had the experience myself. So when I talk to the person about it, I have a general idea of what needs to be done and what's realistic and what isn't. But the number one thing that I guess I've done personally, and again, I don't know how much this relates to others, but I kind of find people that are already doing fix and flips in certain areas and they're good at what they're doing, but it's at a smaller scale. And then I kind of get involved and provide capital to make it a bigger enterprise, but that it's more often than not. And I think anybody can relate to this, that in business, people seek people that they can trust. And it sounds so ridiculous and basic, but I have gained more clients or partners because other people have effed up. It's really that simple. It's like, there's almost nothing worse that I could think of to an investor that works really hard to get a good deal and their money partner falls apart at the end, right when they have to close. And I've never done that to a partner before. And most of the partners that I've received are because somebody else did that to them. And if you can be trusted upon and you can be relied upon, I guess it's on to life as well. I mean, partners, whether it's work or whatever, but that to me has probably been my biggest success story, is that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I hate being vague like that, guys, but it's just, there's just so many people out there that are out to either screw people either intentionally or unintentionally. And when you show your value and, you create those partnerships, sometimes I'm not the least expensive route for them to go, but they stick with me because they know it's going to be there. So I think I went a tad off topic there, but if I'm just going to give a few more seconds, I find, not only do I find people that are good at what they're doing, but I really vet them. I do most of the vetting online. I do it within my own entity at first, and then later I'll usually let them do it in their own entity. But it gets predictable. And I work with the same people over and over again. I hate one-offs. The number one easiest way to vet is or hardest way to vet is if you just keep doing one-off deals after one-off deals after one-off deals with different partners all the time. I will avoid, I don't care how much money I'm going to make on a deal. If it's a one-off and I'm probably never going to work with them again, it's just too much due diligence. It's too much time. It's too much effort. I'm here to build relationships. I have guys that I've worked with for 12 years now. And when they send me a deal, they don't waste my time. I know it's a deal that I'm going to be able to do because they know what my parameters are.
This is Connie, and I'd like to just chime in and say that exactly what Chris said is regards to values. When you could find like-minded people that have the same values as you do, then magic happens. And that's a wonderful thing about this group, is because we're coming together, and then coming together is the start. Working together is the next step, and being able to trust and rely on each other is success. So from everything that Chris has said, I agree 110%. I don't back out. I vet the deal first, and I don't commit until I'm sure that it's going to work. Now, of course, life happens, but that's where proactive communication is invaluable. So well said, Chris.
And it makes a big difference, right, Chris, when you have somebody that's operating on the ground, right, that really knows that market, and like you have had some experience with it versus you being in California to make your investment, in multiple states in the East Coast or even across the ocean, right, in Hawaii. Having somebody locally that really understands that, and obviously you partner up with them, so that's a whole different way of looking at things. That you don't necessarily have to do a lot of these things yourself, especially if it's something new that you want to venture out. Best to have someone who's actually have done that, have the track record, and really get a feel for that business. And then over time, then you gain the nuances of the business, if you will, and and you get into it that way. So for what that's worth, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be remote. It doesn't have to be remote too, guys. I mean, one of my favorite things is find realtors local to you and, pitch them. One of my favorite realtors was when I first started, and she was, she kind of specialized in selling properties to investors. And she had a whole list of people she would email deals out to, and they were good deals. And some of them I didn't move quick enough on, and I lost. And eventually I had a conversation with her, and I through negotiating, I came to an agreement with her that if you sell me or if you come to me first before you send out to your whole investor network, I will let you double in the deal. So, in other words, when I fix and flip it, when I'm ready to flip it, she can represent me there too. And this is kind of rich, guys, but the deal she was giving me was worth it. I also gave her 10% of the profit on the deal as well. Now, this is also very interesting because her husband was a general contractor, and he acted as the general contractor on the deals as well. And I was getting wholesale prices without any markups from him on doing the flips. And it was even better because since she was reselling the property, if there were any hiccups or anything in the construction, I didn't have to say a word because she wouldn't be happy about it. And she would go complain to her husband that you need to do this and you need to do that. But it was a great team, and it worked really well when we were doing short sales, you know, back in around between 2010 and 2012. And I think we're going to see a slight uptick in more short sales and foreclosures. So that can become more of an option. But, you know, it's about building a team and one person, you know, if you can find a good realtor out there and, you know, you can create something like that too.
Chris, would you be willing to just high level talk about the level of vetting that you have done with partners in the past?
Yeah. It is a very broad topic. I can talk about certain instances and certain things that I do, but there's so much vetting you can do over the internet now that you just couldn't do, you know, 15 years ago. One of my favorite things to do is if you have a brand new partner, and you just don't know a lot about them, ask them if they don't mind if you run a credit report on them. And it's like $30, guys, I mean, just Google it and you can find out so much about people just about that. And one of my favorite things to do is ask them that, and they say, okay, then, you know, tell them, so I am going to run this report. Is there anything you want to tell me before I run this, before I run this report? And I had an instance once where a guy said, nah, I got nothing to tell you. And then I get his report back and there's some issues there. And, you know, when I brought it to his attention, he goes, yeah, but, and it's just all these different excuses. And it really told me a lot about that person ahead of time. Now, these were small things. If he had told me before I ran the report, yeah, there's this thing where I, you know, vouched for my aunt and it dinged my credit. And then I saw that on the report. I would have continued to do business with the guy because he was honest and upfront with me, but he wasn't. And I saw that, and it wasn't like, you know, he just thought maybe I wasn't going to run it. And he ended up losing the deal. And frankly, that's, you know, you got to be careful with new partners and do a background check, ask, you know, the real estate community is not huge. And especially when you screw up. So if you're going to work with somebody, if there's any other people that have worked with them before, you know, that can be very helpful. You know, two guys that I work with in Tampa for 12 years now, we got in touch because we knew a title agent in common. I did, you know, a few dozen deals with this title agent in Tampa. And these guys were fix and flippers and they had worked with him and they lost their money partner. And I didn't know who they were, but we got connected through this title agent. We both had significant amount of deals with him. We both trusted him through, you know, a party that we both knew. So that was a good start. Now, when I started with these people and they were flippers and they did things out of their own entity, for the first couple of deals, I said, all right, guys, I want to develop this long-term, you know, situation. But in the beginning, I did it exclusively out of my entity. I purchased the property and I treated them more as a contractor rather than as a partner at first, just to make sure everything went smoothly. Last thing I want to do is have to go foreclose on somebody I don't even know. So they were up for that and it worked out really, really well. And then later we did it more out of their entities and I was able to use my self-directed 401k and be able to have the gains tax-free. And that's been a very fruitful partnership since then. If there's anything particular about vetting that you guys have questions about, I'm more than happy to share too. One last thing, guys, I just want to say this. I mean, look, when I first started, the first thing I'd recommend is try to specialize. Don't, figure out something that you want, at least focus on it first. And when you've done that, one resource that I found really terrific, and it's totally free, is go to biggerpockets.com. It's a quirky name, but a great site, lots of wonderful forums and things like that. I found a mentor. I mean, I called a whole bunch of people that were doing what I wanted to do. And I mean, I called a couple dozen different people, and most of them just didn't want to give me the time of day. Kind of felt like I'd be some kind of competition. And then I found somebody, and we ended up, he helped me out a lot, helped me out with my paperwork. We ended up doing some deals together, and it was just a great way to start. And I'm bringing that up because when it comes to vetting, if you have somebody who's a mentor who's done this before, obviously they can share how they're vetting, their whole vetting process too. Just be careful not to over vet, guys. I've beat out other guys on deals because I was able to vet it quicker than them. So be careful with the over analyzing as well.
Aloha, gang. Yeah, I think, Chris said a lot of it, and Connie did too as well. But here's what I do want to say. I think when it comes to vetting, expectations from both sides need to be clearly met well before you finally decided to do the deal. And I think a lot of times the expectations may be spelled out, but the parameters sometimes change in the middle, and it needs to be very clear what those expectations are, because that can end the deal. And with respect to deals that I've done, I pulled out of deals because expectations just got out of line. And I think that's an really important thing that needs to be set in the very beginning. Like I said, along and adding on to what Chris and Connie were both saying, it's important that people understand how the deal is being considered, whether you're a money partner or whether you're the borrower, and exactly how you want that to go off. And I think that's the most important part to the entire thing, because you can have the best. I'm all about deal structuring, and that's a big, huge proponent for me. And if that deal is set up properly, and you're moving forward, expectations are very clear, but then the actions begin to change in the process, that will definitely kill a deal. And I have gone through those enough that my expectations are very, very clear about what I expect on the deal, as well as I would expect them on two sides of the deal to be able to give me what they're looking at as well too. So that's the primary thing that I wanted everybody to understand, is when it comes to the deal vetting, you can be as clear and you can have the best numbers in the world, but if the expectations are not clear, the deal will die.
Charlie, quick question for you. Directly
Yes.
or indirectly, what percentage of deals that you come across do you actually follow through with?
Oh, probably, I would say probably 20% of my deals. And I think most of it is because I use the 1% rule too, Chris, and all that when I'm doing that part of it. But if I'm lending funds, it's what I find is, and I hate to use this word, but the reality is sometimes people get greedy. And when that greed kicks in and that they start to change and ask for more because the expectations weren't set forth, or they decided they wanted to try to, push the issue and see if they can get a little bit more in the deal. They need to be, like you said, they need to be very upfront in the very beginning on exactly what they can and cannot do. And no assumptions should be made. So I truly believe, when it comes to being able to get a good deal going, that those expectations need to be very, very clear, that once you're in the deal, that it doesn't start changing to the point where, it, like I said, it'll kill a deal. And it did kill some deals for me that I just decided, that's it. I'm walking away from the table.
Oh, me too. Me too. And to your point, Charlie, I mean, if I'm including, you know, a lot of the marketing and things like that, it's less than 1% for me of deals that I
Yeah.
actually go through that cross, you know, my desk. And it's the point I'm trying to make, guys, is that, you know, don't get frustrated when you just can't get deals that fit your numbers and that makes sense. It's a numbers game. Most things, people are either unreasonable with what they think their house is worth, or it just doesn't pan out in terms of the numbers, even if they are reasonable. So through whatever means, directly or indirectly, you know, put yourself in front of a lot of different deals. And you will have to put yourself out there at some point. Everything is not everything, but most good deals, there's risk. There is risk, and you got to get comfortable with risk. This is not a game of biweekly paychecks and an easy job. This is a game of really number crunching and lots of deal analysis. And I wouldn't change it for the world. It's the most fun I've ever had in terms of work. I absolutely love it, but you're going to have a lot more success if you can get used to the fact that most deals that come across your table are not worth doing, but put yourself in front of a lot of deals.
And thanks, Chris. And to that extent, this is what I did want to say. People, I think, also need to be very realistic about timetables, because sometimes people come to the table asking for help, and the timetables are very unrealistic. And as great as the deal might look, you know, you could end up jumping into a deal and finding out that, oh man, you just hung yourself after you've been in a deal, not really realizing that you should have really gone through the proper vetting. So I think it's important that that's done very, very well in the front end, as far as the realities of what the timetable is and what your vetting process will be, to make sure that, you know, you cover yourself, you know, as well as helping them to be covered as well too, right? So that's the part of the expectations I need, that I know that needs to be set up front, you know. So and a lot of times, and you know, that's in that 20% I talked about as well too, having to walk away from some of the deals, not because they were bad deals necessarily, but just because the timetables were just too unrealistic.
They always are, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say this, but they always are. Everybody has unrealistic expectations, whether you, and most of the time it's subconscious. You just, it's, you know, any fix and flip, if you get a number, just double it. And then you're
Exactly.
Surprised if it's less time. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
I'd rather that. I mean, every time I if I could get a nickel for every time somebody could do a fix and flip in 90 days, I would have quite a few dollars.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And that's okay, as long as you know and you can expect that.
So I agree that expectations should be set up front, but when you are putting together your documents, where do you document those expectations?
In the documents.
In the, like,
In the
okay,
document, yeah.
I don't know, I'm a novice, so is it in the operating agreement? Is it in, where is it?
You know, Katrina, it's a good question, and I'm having trouble answering because it's a very broad question and answer. I mean, it depends on what kind of deal you're doing. If it's just like you're lending on a fix and flip, then your expectations are all spelled out in a promissory note and a mortgage. And there's some written ones too. You got to have a good understanding, and it's so tough because there's this, you want to move very quickly, which is totally opposite of having to go through a note and mortgage and all this written stuff. But you got to be very careful, because when you're starting a relationship with somebody, whether it's fix and flips or whether it's in life, there's always that euphoria phase and the honeymoon stage where you're all excited and everybody's happy and it's a good deal. And that, turns into, that's the time when you got to get the paperwork down and the expectations, when you're in that phase where everybody's happy with each other. Because really a lot of what's in there is what to do when things don't go according to expectations. And the last thing that you want is to not know where you stand when things don't go terrifically. And the best time to go over that and to have an understanding of that is when you both like each other. And look, hopefully you maintain that. I have with most of my partners. But when things go wrong, I mean, even if it's a good cordial relationship, it's like, well, our phone conversation from a few months ago, you said you would do this. And it's like, well, I don't remember committing to that. And what do you do? And if you don't have that written down somewhere.
So, I guess one of the things I could see is like when you are in that honeymoon stage, a lot of times you don't talk about certain things because you don't want to seem like, okay, I'm not trusting you up front. So you're not trusting me up front. So what's going on? Because people do get uncomfortable about talking about those nuances. So how do you approach that when you're trying to develop this relationship and yet say, well, if this happens, I want to make sure that this is,
So here,
That's
that's a
delicate.
really good question. And it's not and I'll be really honest, it's not as delicate as you think. And here's how, is that if you develop a contract with somebody and it's just so heavily skewed in your direction, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. But if it's a good contract where you're protecting yourself and you're going out of your way to put yourself in your own partner's shoes and protecting their interests, then it's not an uncomfortable conversation. And it kind of goes like, look, I need this and this in the contract to protect me. If I were in your shoes, this is and this and this is what I'd want. If I, protect yourself, we got to have it in there so that we both know what to expect from each other.
And
But
I would also chime in, if you'll forgive me, Chris, to say
please.
the best way to stay out of a lawsuit is to assume that you're going to end up in one from the beginning, and document. And if they feel uncomfortable with the documentation process, then maybe that's valuable information, right? Because if they don't feel comfortable that I'm writing this stuff out, then we don't have alignment of values and I can't do business with you, right? So it's kind of like, I look at it like a prenuptial agreement. What happens if we divorce, right? And if they're not willing to sit down and talk through those things and even outline the communication, problem resolution, etc., from the very beginning when we're in that honeymoon stage that Chris mentioned, then hey, I'm not getting married. End of story. You're not the right person for me. Best of luck. Hasta la vista, baby. Right?
Connie, you bring up such a great point, and it is so important. And Katrina, it's like if you are having an uncomfortable time, or if they're uncomfortable having that conversation with you, they might not be the best partner to have, because if they're uncomfortable in a time when things are good and it's a good deal, then either A, they're not a good partner to have, or B, your contract is just too skewed toward favoring you, which can be okay sometimes too. I mean, if you're bringing a lot more to the table and you have a lot more risk, then it should be skewed more in your direction. Or if you're providing all the capital, I have deals where I provide all the capital. If I provide all the capital and you're just providing a little bit of time, then my contract's gonna be very skewed in my direction, protections in my direction. But and look, sometimes it could be an uncomfortable conversation because they sense that you're being uncomfortable, and sometimes just a little bit of practice, over and over again, and to try to get to something that works. But I've had many uncomfortable conversations, and Katrina, I know your line of work, you must have had many of uncomfortable conversations.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes, look, so people don't either want to pay that much or they don't want to give up that much. But the worst thing that you can do is sacrifice benefits to you to make somebody else happy if you feel in your gut they're being unreasonable. And it's okay to have that, look, no, not everybody likes negotiating. I find it's a game. It's kind of fun. And you know, you got to have those uncomfortable conversations in all parts of life, but especially in business. You just have to cover yourself. Guys, if this is going to sound so morbid, but if you're going to be in real estate and you're going to be in it for a long time and you're going to do a lot of deals, you will get sued. At some point, somebody's going to file a lawsuit. It's happened to me. It's happened to just about, you know, everybody I know who's been in it for a long time. And and look, in my case, it's excessively frivolous, and you pay them to go away, but it happens. And if you don't have the right paperwork, it's going to be very hard to show that you have any say here. You don't want it to be a he said, she said thing. So get it on paper.
Yeah, I like and agree with all of what you said, Chris. And Connie, I think that is true. There is something of value when you get pushback. So I like that too. That's great. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Katrina, I just wanted to say something that you can add to everybody's list here is that when you're setting those expectations, well, everything can be negotiable. I think it's important when you actually sit down and you're writing out what your expectations are on any kind of a deal in general, that you build that list. And really, while we say everything is negotiable, a lot of times there's some things that you just feel are non-negotiable. So you need to separate them out and put it on the list so that when you do go through a discussion to begin with any potential, partner, and in any deal that you're doing, that these are what you consider your hardline ones, and these are considered more negotiable. But like I said, it's up to you. You determine from your end what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. But that expectation list is really important because it does set a precedent for what you are willing and not willing to do. And I think that's important for everybody to understand because, we can want the world, but, the realities of what goes through every deal, and every deal is complex. No matter how people say it's very simple, it's not always simple. There's always things that are complicated. It's not because the deal is necessarily complicated. It's just because we're people and people are complicated. So making that list for yourself to begin with is probably maybe one of the first areas to start with, so that you know what you want to be able to work with in discussions on the expectations. Yeah.
Charlie, you bring up a really good point, and one of my favorite things about being an entrepreneur, and that's, look, I worked with a Fortune 500 company for 12 years, and it was some of the best times of my life. But it was never my own company, and I always yearned to start my own thing. And one of the things that I disliked about working for somebody else is that although the vast majority of the time I was working with really great people, there were clearly times when I had people that were above me or a colleague, and it was clear their goal was to manipulate you or use you to every extent that they could to climb the corporate ladder. And I have no patience for that. Look, the older I get, the more I know what I'm good at and what I'm not. And I can tell you, most of my friends that are managers or work in other companies are much better at faking it. I can't. If I don't respect you, I have a very hard time working, with or for you. And one of my favorite things was I had a guy I was working with. He was a fix and flipper, and he was making, I'll be blunt, he's making me a lot of money, but he was such an asshole. He was such an asshole that we would have to change escrow companies every frigging deal because he would burn them out. He would just piss them off. And although he treated me with respect, he treated everybody else horribly. And that reflects upon me. It increased my due diligence extensively because we always had to find another escrow company to work with. And I finally had to just tell him, you know what? You got to find a new money partner after this deal, because I just can't put up with this. You burn your bridges every time we do another deal. And until you figure out a way to stop doing that, I can't live with it. And I was more nuanced than that when I talked to him about it. But you have that power as an entrepreneur to choose your team. And if somebody is hard to talk to or is making your life miserable, you're not working for them. Kick them out. Not part of your team. That's the beautiful part about being an entrepreneur. Pick your own team.